Hello and welcome to another one of my debating videos. This is where I basically ask you to put your opinions and views within the comments below, or give a video response to get your views across and basically add to the debate, which I'm doing. Now this one is going to be, do two-strokes actually have a place within the 21st century? Now I'm doing a project at the moment through uni that is basically to do with this topic, and I've been researching it for the last 2 months basically, and I've got nearly every two-stroke book out there now. But I've found it very interesting when I've been going through, and there's been some things that I've looked into that have kind of surprised me, and it's kind of opened my eyes. Even though I knew two-strokes were good in some aspects, it's surprising to see what other things that I didn't know about beforehand are actually linked in with the two-stroke design. But anyway, the first thing we want to go over is the advantages of two-strokes. The biggest one is the weight. We all know two-strokes are lighter than their comparable four-strokes, just because they don't have as much in them. If we disregard this gearbox here, because this gearbox would be the same in any traditional bike engine, but if we just consider the engine part itself, there's a lot less parts in this system because we don't have any overhead cams, any blooming valve gear or anything, no camshafts. It's just a head. There's now in there, and then there's only a crank, a conrod and a piston, and the cylinder and a head. That's all it is. It's simple as that. But with a four-stroke, like I say, we have all the gubbins on the top. Now another thing you have to take into account is the effective mass. Now the effective mass is basically what it's the weight that an object has when it's spinning, and this can change depending on RPM and so on and so forth. Now because this actually has less rotational parts in it, means overall there's less effective mass within this system, whereas a four-stroke, because we have the cams and all that in the top and the belt, there's actually more rotational mass. Now which this has the effect of is more of the engine power is going to turn those parts up in the top of the head, when it could be used for powering the wheels at the back. Now with this system, because we don't have any of this there and there's less rotational mass, two-strokes, one, it helps make more power, two, it makes them rev quicker, and it's just generally good to have less effective mass within your system. But the biggest reason why two-strokes generate more power is because they have a firing cycle every rotation of the crank. Now this is just common knowledge, whereas four-strokes have a firing stroke every 2 rotations of the crank. So that's why they do have a power advantage. Now it's the general rule of thumb is an equivalent two-stroke will have 1.6 times the power of its four-stroke counterpart. Now like I say, this can be more or less dependent on the application and how the actual two-stroke is built, but that is the rule of thumb that's used in the reference books. And add that to the actual lighter weight they have in the first place, the power to weight ratio for two-strokes kind of does outweigh the four-strokes quite a lot. Now the biggest reason why two-strokes went out of favour back in the early 90s to late 80s was because of emission levels. Now most people see emissions as just one thing, when actually the emissions themselves are made up of lots of components. Now the two-stroke failed on the hydrocarbons. Now the reason for this is because when the fuel is actually allowed into the cylinder with this traditional method, the exhaust port is also open. So that means unburned fuel can get straight over the top of the piston crown and actually out the exhaust without being burned. And this actually adds to the hydrocarbon output at the end of the exhaust system. Now with companies try to help this by doing different scavenging techniques, and that's basically how the fuel reacts within the actual cylinder to keep it in. But the best scavenging technique cannot prevent all the fuel from staying in, well, can't prevent 100% of the fuel to stay in the engine. Some of it will get out the exhaust system. Another thing that I added to hydrocarbons was the oil. Now this one's an auto lube system, which I am converting to a premix for my tests, but firstly it started out with premixes and then it went to auto lube system, which was a well, it delivered the oil more accurately and could give different ratios of fuel depending on the RPM, and that did help slightly because there was a more precise amount of oil going into the system. But nonetheless, this did add to the hydrocarbon output at the end of the exhaust. Now, like I said before, emissions aren't just one big dirty cloud. There are many components with it, and one of the main components that companies are having to reduce now is NOx levels. Now, this is nitrogen oxide, which is actually formed within high temperature and high pressure situations. Now, a lot of four-strokes have got a problem with this, and this is the main thing that manufacturers are trying to reduce because it causes acid rain and stuff when it mixes with moisture. Two-strokes are naturally low in producing NOx, which is nitrogen oxides, the different things. Now the reason for this I should say, is because they have a low compression ratio and a lower temperature than their counterpart four-strokes, which means less nitrogen oxide is produced in the combustion process, to the point where it would actually, this one to its equivalent four-stroke would actually beat it on emission levels for nitrogen oxide, but the four-stroke would eat this for its hydrocarbon levels. Now, when I was doing my research, there's quite a few nifty ideas to try and lower the actual hydrocarbon output of two-strokes. One is the orbital direct injection, which Aprilia use on their scooters, so do Peugeot on their two-stroke scooters, and a lot of outboard two-stroke motors use this system as well to get within emission laws, and they actually do get pretty low within those emission levels as well. And the idea of this is to inject the fuel when the exhaust port is shut. And when the exhaust port is shut and you inject the fuel in, 100% the fuel is going to get burnt, none of it's going to exit the exhaust, so that means the fuel can then be taken out of the equation for the unburnt hydrocarbons that are in the exhaust. Now, with Orbital as well, they've got this air assist system which basically injects a small amount of air in with the fuel, and basically what this does, it kind of makes like a balloon around the fuel front, and this stops the oil from mixing as well with the fuel than it would in a normal two-stroke, and this means the oil doesn't take as big of a part in the combustion as it normally would. Now, when oil doesn't take as big of a part in the combustion, that means it can actually be used more efficiently at lubricating, because it's not getting burnt, it can be used back in the engine for lubrication. And this has actually reduced within these systems oil usage by around about 80%, which is dramatic. So this also adds to the actual hydrocarbon output out the back, because oil was another big contributor in the hydrocarbons. But now, because there's 80% less being burnt, that means there's 80% less hydrocarbons out the back because of the oil, basically. That's a rough estimate, that's just basically a roundabout figure. But with this idea that the emissions for two-strokes can be solved, the hydrocarbons anyway, because the rest of it's actually pretty much fine, if the hydrocarbons were cut, that is the only advantage that the four-strokes had over two-strokes. Now, companies are not going to jump on two-strokes, even if the technology did come about that said, okay, two-strokes are more efficient than four, because manufacturers have put too much research and development into four-strokes to just put them on the shelf. So four-strokes are always going to be around, that's fact, that's not going to die out. Four-strokes are going to be here for a long, long while. But I can see certain manufacturers actually picking up two-strokes and running them with the four-strokes side by side. One company, Lotus, are actually doing an Omnivo engine, if you haven't heard about it. If you look it up, it's a great bit of science within it. It's a great engine. But basically the idea was it was a two-stroke engine that used compression ignition and could be run on loads of different fuels, propane, petrol, ethanol, anything. And it started in development in 2008 and it's still being developed now. And the early results from that, the two-stroke Omnivo engine outperformed the four-strokes of equivalent size immensely. And I've got statistics and stuff on my computer, and it's actually quite amazing how much they actually outperformed the 4-strokes by. Now, the 2-stroke in that was basically to power a generator, so it wasn't actually for engine to wheel power, it was for engine to generator to wheel power. But nonetheless, it still shows that the 2-strokes do have a place in my mind, even if, curse me for saying this, if it is a hybrid system that are used in. Don't get me wrong, I'm not totally against hybrid systems, but they're just nowhere near as refined as they should be to say they are the logical option to have. Nah. But anyway, but with all this, and then add to a fact you can add a catalytic converter on the back, a 3-way cat, which reduces the emissions even more, and I've got another book in there that actually tests this and shows the emissions can be dropped by, in the orbital systems, by around about 80% or something with the cat on the back. I think by looking at the graphs, that's just me doing the graphs and eyeing them up to see, guessing the percentages of it. But yeah, like I say, my opinion is on the whole thing that 2-strokes do have a place within the 21st century. I just don't think it's as big of a place as they should be, just because 4-strokes have been around for so much longer and all the manufacturers have put the effort into researching just 4-strokes. See, I think if the same research went into 2-strokes, you would have a lot more refined of an engine in the 2-stroke than the 4, with the amount of R&D that do put into the 4-stroke technology. But that's just my opinion. But the facts are there, and I've said some of the facts about it, and the facts are plain to see that 2-strokes can be a viable option in engines. It's just there. They just need work on them. They just need a bit of work to make them more refined. But that's my opinion. I'm going to stop rattling now because no doubt I would have borrowed half years by now. But like I say, leave your comments in the bottom. Do a video if you want and upload it and put it as a video response. I will accept that straight away and put it on for you. And we'll see what the overall feeling is on this subject, because like I say, I feel passionately about it. I love 2-strokes, and I don't think they get enough praise. I think that they should have a higher value now. They should be looked into more. They're not something that should be just sat on a shelf and just cast into history. I think they should be looked into. Don't get me wrong, they have to be refined. This one's an old type of 2-stroke. This type of 2-stroke with a carburetor and a traditional exhaust is not going to last. Don't get me wrong. But I think a system like this with an direct injection put into it would last. That's my opinion. But anyway, I shall leave you with that. Keep safe and everything. Put all your comments in the comment box below. Like I say, video responses are welcome. Keep safe, and I shall see you around.